And I'm very proud to say tonight, with the help of Dr. Julian Chambliss from Rollins College and his students, and our friends from the Democracy Forum, we're starting the Oscar Mack project. We're going to make Central Florida proud. We're going to lift up these stories. Oscar Mack's story will never be buried. We need all your help. Please visit the site. Thank you.
We were familiar with Ocoee, but not this new incident that you have uncovered, which you've actually had in your files. Could you give us a brief sort of summary of the Oscar Mack incident?
Mack was a veteran of World War I, and he got a contract to deliver mail from the rail station to the post office. He got this contract and clearly was a point of communal anger, and the rumor quickly spread to someone in the post office, one of the people working in the post office, that they were going to attack him, lynch him. This postal worker gave Mack a gun to protect himself. They came to his house, 3 men. He shot, killed 2 of those men. There was a coroner's jury, that much is clear, and then he was hung. Several references to a man believed to be Oscar Mack lynched at Lake Jenny Jewel.
Well, I've had a bit of history doing this kind of work, looking into lynchings and race-based atrocities. Back in the 90s, I was part of a group called the Democracy Forum. We looked into the Ocoee massacre, which is the Election Day massacre of a whole community in Ocoee, and the lynching of July Perry in downtown Orlando. And that work went on for almost a decade. And then around 2012, I went to a conference that was organized by Alliance of Truth and Reconciliation in Atlanta. It just sort of reawoke in me, realizing that, wow, this work is still going on. And one of my founders, friends, and good friend and founder of the Democracy Forum, Sandy Cawthorn, was with me, and she said, wow, I haven't looked at this material. We have archives, we have crates and digital archives, and we were looking through all this material again, and in that process, I came across a clipping that I'd never seen before. And it said, Oscar Mack lynched at Lake Jenny Jewel, downtown Orlando. And I looked at Sandy and I said, did you ever see that? Like, we've been, doing this work for so long, and it just was kind of a shock. And I said, Sandy, that's like just a mile from my house. That's really where it began, just looking at what was already sitting in our crates. I knew about this radical historian at Rollins College, heard a few things about him, and I approached him. I said, do you want to do a project? I said, I want to involve students right off the bat. And he said, well, you know what? I got a theme for the next semester, and timing was right. And so I said, well, Julian, let's do this. And he had agreed to, I think it was your winter, was it the winter or spring? Spring 2013 semester, he was willing to allocate the class and bring the students along. www.oscarmackproject.com. We launched February 2013, and then he put his students on the project right away. And that's how we got rolling.
And at the time, it was interesting because like I had never heard of it, right? Like, and of course, on the one hand, that's not surprising.
Right.
On the other hand, I feel like I should have heard of it because I was very aware of the Ocoee riot and the Rosewood, right? Like, so these were all sort of like, if you think about it in terms of like temporal terms, like with in the same era. So it was like, there's ancillary narratives around racial animus in the area, right? Because there had been a huge traumatic mass killing, expulsion, cleansing, ethnic cleansing.
On November 3rd, 1920, the entire black community of Ocoee was erased. They were burned to the ground.
So my first thought was like, there's no way that happened right here. Black people know about it. And this happened over here, and black people don't know about it, right? Like, they must know. So what's the connection here? And so it became this question, like, we need to, like, take what we know about this world and, like, expand on what this Oscar Mack case is. And we need to go and pull it apart, blow it up, and see, like, details. We need to find details of, like, why this man was killed.
There was a federal contract that was available for someone to take mail from the railroad office to the post office, and this is actually the post office. And this was open to whoever wanted to do it. The person who had been doing it for many years was an older white man, and Oscar Mack put in the low bid. It's a federal contract. He put in the low bid and got the contract. What happened after that is that he was immediately threatened that if he showed up to work, he would be killed.
Just as being a postmaster or postmistress of a U.S. Postal Office is considered to be a white job, just as a skilled worker within a post office is generally considered to be a white job. So if you violate that prescription, then you not only threaten to upend or violate the Jim Crow system, there are going to be some white people who are going to be very angry with you, and you may suffer physical retaliation.
And we look for the death certificate, right? Because like every newspaper kind of said he's dead. And with lynching, that can get complicated. And we talked a little bit about this because, like, well, he was in Kissimmee, how come he ended up on Lake Jenny Jewel, which is in Orlando? How did he get from Kissimmee to Lake Jenny Jewel? And I'm like, find out about that. like he didn't teleport. Like, so what happened? But that was never clear. But what's clear though, like, we got a better sense of like, this is the incident.
We scouted around Lake Jenny Jewel. We should share a little of that story too. And I said, let's just
Go down.
look and see the site. And we went around and we found only one part of the lake, the southern side of the lake, that looked like there was a home that was probably there in early 1900s. It's a beautiful old southern mansion style home on the south side of the lake. And we just both kind of got chills. And there was even like a little driveway that said, keep out. Well, we went in. It's also along the railroad track, which connects to Kissimmee. So you kind of almost in your mind, you picture them bringing him up that line. And there was a stop there at Lake Jenny Jewel. This was, and we should mention too, this is the oldest part of Orlando, right? So all this felt physically right.
At the time, I was like, okay, well, we have a better sense of like what was the root cause of the animus. And they used secondary sources to characterize some of the actors, the social landscape, the political, economic concerns. Oh, John Smith was killed. He was lynched by a mob. 9 times out of 10, you go look, you can find a death certificate for John Smith. Like now, lots of details on that death certificate might be all in the dark ether, like, well, who killed him, all that. No, but the fact he's dead I felt like we should be able to find it because it had been so covered in the news. And the location was clear. Like, so it wasn't as if like he was snatched and they don't know what happened to him. Like, no, he came from Kissimmee, they hanged him in Lake Jenny Jewel. I'm like, well.
When we did the work that we did with my class, we were able to sort of like create a fuller accounting of the story. But the one thing we could never do, and I was always dissatisfied, was we could never find out how Oscar Mack was killed. We could never find his death certificate. We did a records request, we searched through everything, we read all these newspapers, could never find his death certificate.
In this case, the State Vital Statistics Office said there is no Oscar Mack that died in Florida. What? Julian, I'm scratching my head. What does this mean? You know, Professor, I'm just the activist here. I'm the troublemaker, but help me figure this out.
And I remember telling a student who said to me in the context of the class, that it was a young lady, and she said, well, maybe he got away. And I said, no, these are not stories where people get away.
Right.
And we sort of left it with me attempting to take this fuller narrative, which I felt at the time was a success. But, you know, our goal was to service the effort of Curtis and the community group and the question of awareness, especially in the terms of the students, right? They needed to understand, and they've done so much work, right? They did a lot of great things. And so we put it all together. We created like a website. We gave it to Curtis. I'm like, you know, Curtis, I hope that I'll be able to get back to this story. But I got other classes to teach. The semester is over, and I will get back to it, I swear. I left this story behind for a little bit, still puzzled. I periodically check in, find another story about the sheriff or another story about him being on the run, but couldn't find what happened to him. I couldn't find where he settled. I couldn't find his grave, and it bothered me. But eventually, Curtis really solved this problem because that website he created, even before we did one thing, he kept up.
But we put the website up, and it sat there for maybe a year.
And it just sat there. Just sat there. Just sat there.
And one day I get an email from a guy named James Brown, because there was a button on the site that said, if you have any information, contact us.
And he told me that, and I was like, you're making that up. James Brown called you? Are you? Wait, what? No, his name is James Brown. He says that he knows what happened to Oscar Mack. And I was like, what?
He didn't die. He lived.
Oscar Mack got away. He changed his name, escaped to New Jersey, ended up in Ohio, and died in 1960. He got away. And I was like, this is awesome.
According to the U.S. Census, Oscar Mack was born September 20th, 1893. When he was 6, the 1900 census record was recorded. However, according to the World War I draft registration cards for the years 1917 through 1919, Oscar Mack was born on September 20th, 1892. Oscar Mack's family consisted of his father, William Mack, mother, Maria Mack, brothers Charles Moore and William Mack Jr. Oscar's father's name, William Mack Sr., was born in Georgia in 1864 and worked as a laborer. Oscar Mack's mother was Maria Mack. She was born in North Carolina in 1864 and worked as a laundress.
Like, we found out, like, Oscar Mack was a veteran. We found his records.
He fought in the European theater in France. This was an emotional time for Oscar Mack because he was fighting for a country that believed that the citizens of his ethnic background was not entitled to civil rights nor human rights.
Because, like, he became, like, one of, like, a host of African Americans who had fought in World War I who would sort of experience a different world and then come back to America where, like, they were still pretty racist, where the Europeans were that treated them like human beings. And of course, the political context, right? Like African Americans were pressing for political power.
Mr. Mack was stationed in different European countries, which he embraced and was recognized for his courage and bravery. His rank was being a private and was honorably discharged on July 17th, 1919.
So Oscar Mack was like a person of a generation that was like asking for more.
He come back to America with that same mindset, forgetting that you're not in France anymore. So when he boldly bidded for the U.S. Postal job, I think he forgot where he was.
In 1922, Mack indirectly became a federal employee after receiving a government contract. This job was not given to him through applying. He won the bid.
So, but by him winning that bid, there are other people competing for that because that's money beyond what you would make normally as a letter carrier.
Yes.
So, and he might have people working for him furthermore.
Yes. And chances are they might have been of the race, and then represented the fact that a black man is over them, possibly, you know.
And he got the contract. And that was the reason that the two men came looking for him. He had been warned by the assistant postmaster, I think it was. And when they came, he defended himself.
These events come from newspaper accounts and from the testimony of the coroner's jury convened after the events occurred. Oscar Mack's first and last day on the job. Sunday, July 16, 1922, is a defining moment of Oscar Mack's life. The events of this day will affect every day of his life that follows. Early Sunday morning, Oscar Mack is at his job. He goes to the train station to get the mail pouches to bring back to the post office. But standing in his way are three white men who threaten him. They tell him he cannot hold a white man's job and warned he must leave town by 12 midnight. On the Saturday before, Oscar Mack had received a letter that warned him to leave in 24 hours. Under that threat, he still showed up for work. We find a reference in one newspaper article that Oscar Mack had notified the police of these threats. That resulted in a weak attempt to protect him, as reported in a newspaper article stating that the town marshal had been placed to guard his house that Saturday night. We would find out later that Sheriff L.R. Farmer was warned under federal pressure not to let Oscar Mack come to harm because he was a federal employee. George Best was a postal worker, and when he came to work early Sunday morning, he found Oscar Mack there, but no mail pouches. Oscar told him why, and then they both went to the train station to get the mail. The three white men had gone, so they came back to the post office with the mail pouches. C.C. Collins, the assistant postmaster, was also at work that morning, and when he heard about the three men, he issued Oscar Mack a post office revolver, saying, "Use it on any person who interferes with you." The rest of Oscar Mack's only day at work was uneventful, but the night would be one of the most traumatic in Kissimmee's history.
That night, 4 men came to his home. Over the course of the research that we did with my students, we're able to piece together a chain of events that, even to this day, standing here, I can tell you I'm not 100% sure of all the permutations of it. But in brief, it is this. These 4 men came to his home. Some words were exchanged. He opened fired. He shot and killed 2 men. One died immediately there. One died later from his wounds. A 3rd man was wounded and the fourth man who was there was just simply the witness. But in reality, as we started to search more and more, one of the things that emerged was that the story of Oscar Mack really became layered with more and more narratives about race, about power, and about fear. Because when he shot these two men, when he opened fire, he disappeared and was not found.
Stuart Ivey of the Shingle Creek Settlement was one of the two that died in the attack on Oscar Mack that night. His great-granddaughter, Renee Bronson, still lives in Kissimmee.
So, as I understand it today, Oscar Mack did shoot my great-grandfather, Stuart Ivey, in what now I understand must have been a Klan raid. My earliest memory that I now understand connected to this incident was my grandmother, who was probably the most progressive woman in Kissimmee in the 1950s, but even she referred to it as the night that shot your granddad.
The day following the shooting, after 11 p.m., when the injured men were taken to the hospital, up until around 3 o'clock, an angry mob formed.
And what occurred was, of course, a search for him that entailed probably 200 to 300 people milling around Kissimmee searching for Oscar Mack throughout this period. And this is a period from roughly July 16th to July 29th.
We have this testimony from Mack Battle of North Kissimmee, a witness from the coroner's jury. This is the last documented spot in Kissimmee we can place Oscar Mack. Mr. Battle says he was awakened in the dark around 10:15 Sunday night. In the dark, he could not see the person's face, but recognized Oscar Mack's voice, who told him there had been some shooting. Oscar wanted Mr. Battle to tell him where Sheriff Farmer lived, because he wanted to give himself up. Soon after Oscar left, Mack Battle said he heard the siren blow for the sheriff. Scipio Lassane was an important person in Kissimmee, and he also happened to be African American. His granddaughter, Juanita Lassane, and her family grew up just across the street from Oscar Mack, but about 30 years after all this happened. In this picture, we see young Juanita with Oscar Mack's original house just visible in the background, and in another family photo, we can see the house again in the background. The dirt roads had been paved for years, and Oscar Mack's house is gone, long gone, but not the family story of Juanita's grandfather, Scipio Lassane, and how he played a crucial part in the saga of Oscar Mack and history. Juanita tells the story passed down to her family, as told to her by her cousin Tammy.
And I said, Tammy, I really do think that Pa helped Oscar Mack. She said he did. She said, grandmother told us. Then she went on to tell me that he hit him in a car. She said the trunk of a car. I'm thinking a car at that time, it was probably a rumble seat or equivalent, and drove him to state line.
Oscar Mack's story has burning questions we may never answer. His journey to escape the Klan did not end at the Georgia state line. Florida Mae tells her grandson James part of the story.
And he made his way by foot. And I remember her telling me that it was like the spirit of his grandmother, or his mother, guided him through the swamps until he was able to make his way well into Georgia. So finally, we really don't know how he ended up in Ohio. I'm pretty sure that we found out later that he did have help, but he finally ended up in New Jersey. And from there, my great-grandmother and my grandmom joined him.
Oscar Mack disappears from Kissimmee. He leaves behind his name and all that he knew to start a new life, trying to survive each day and constantly afraid of the Klan. In this record, Oscar Mack uses his new identity as Lanier Johnson. In the 1926 Youngstown City Directory, both he and Dorothy are listed, living at 704 Hemrod Avenue. He worked at the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company, based in Youngstown, Ohio. Oscar Mack is gone. The only trial Oscar Mack would ever get was the coroner's jury who pronounced him guilty of murder. His actions of self-defense would never be acknowledged.
But they were fugitives, mind you. So this is why they were constantly moving. Because my great-grandmother, Adele, would have dreams and she would say, "Old man, we've got to move again." So they were constantly moving, always motivated by fear, for perhaps the Klan would probably end up finding them. So he made his way into Akron, highly intelligent, highly motivated man. He became a butcher as a result to make a living. He lived in New York for a while, and this was in the height of the Depression as well. So he tried to make a living for great-grandma Adele.
Thanks to letters and other documents saved by daughter Florida May, we learn a little how that life was. Adele writes to Oscar, now Lanier, postmarked August 1933, when Lanier had to travel to Asbury Park, New Jersey to seek work, leaving Adele behind in Sicklerville, New Jersey.
My darling husband, both letters received Monday and Wednesday. Florida May and kids left Saturday at 12:30. Mrs. Varpole asked me to stay and can some peaches, so I did, and cooked supper for them, and she was tickled to death. So after then, she told me to come every day, so I did, and they have plenty to eat. Mrs. Varpole gave me sugar, coffee, lard, oil, 3 jars of peaches, and a meat while I'm home for today. Mr. Joe said he sure would see to me getting on relief if you came home or not. But I think I would rather wait because I would get more if you was home. They won't give me but $1.50. She told me I wouldn't be hungry if I came and helped them. I feel like helping every day for something to eat. So after you get what meat is promised you, you had better come home so Mr. Joe can help us get on relief. So dear, be sweet, and when you can, I know you will send me some change. Take care of yourself and be sweet. Love to all. Your wife, Dorothy.
You had mentioned that they watched her after the night of the shootings when he escaped.
Mm-hmm.
They kept an eye out.
Yes, they did.
The Klan did.
Mm-hmm.
Because they were looking for him, and the newspapers say there were 50 carloads of white supremacists, and so they were looking at her, at Adela, to try to get clues as where to waylay him.
Yeah.
I wish I could have known about him a little bit earlier, because I just thought he was just a lonesome, kind of a strange person. I wish my mother had told me early. And I said to her, "Why didn't you tell me this early, Mama?" She said, "Well, I promised."
This is how it damaged his life, where he couldn't live freely. He had to live in fear and hiding.
But again, the fear that governed her life and their lives. They told her, "You cannot tell anybody about this," so she kept it a secret for a number of years. Well, my Aunt Melissa and my mom would visit Sicklerville quite often when they were children. And he was a very gentle man, quiet demeanor.
because he was not a mean man. Never cursed. None of that. I never heard that from him. He was a mild man who had been persecuted, and he was still being persecuted when he thought he was free up here.
They would go to church. There was a church not far from where they lived. But they said that he was a generous soul, just a quiet man who would share with them whatever he had.
Because he communicated with my mother, but like I said, he never communicated with my sister and I. Or anybody else for that matter outside of my dad. And we could be sitting in the living room like this, and he'll come down and get dinner or whatever, or breakfast, and then he'd go back upstairs. He'd say good morning, and then the next time he'd come down, he'd say, Liz, how you doing? That's what everybody used to call me, Liz. How you doing? How is school? I said, it's okay, Grandpa. How you doing? I'm okay. That was it. He didn't communicate with children too well. And I don't think he communicated with adults too well either. But now I understand.
Lanier had a business sense, and we know from the 1910 census he was a butcher in Kissimmee. That experience came in handy as he picked up the threads of his old life and brought them into the new. Lanier sold meats and groceries, and here is his card, phone number, and address. In 1927 and 1928, Lanier and Dorothy were able to acquire 2 cars. Here are the certificates of ownership. In 1931, on May 16th, we see Lanier Johnson was baptized in Akron, Ohio, at Jesus Only Church. The Great Depression was a hard time for Lanier's family, and he wrote to the President of the United States in 1934, a letter that was forwarded to Camden County, New Jersey's Emergency Relief Administration. Lanier asked the President for help with Dorothy's medical needs. The reply was only suggestions to try other places for help. 1938, Lanier Johnson and Adele Dorothy Keene are finally married, March 12, 1938, in Turnerville, New Jersey. 1940, October. Lanier and Dorothy were in a serious car accident reported in the Vineland, New Jersey Daily Journal. Lanier was driving and hit a horse and rider crossing the highway, the impact throwing both horse and rider into the car through the roof. The horse died of his injuries, but during the animal's final convulsions, Dorothy was seriously injured. Lanier had only a cut on his finger. Lanier may be 49 years old, but in 1942, he still has to register for the draft for World War II. He lists his employer as the Hotel Congress in Akron, Ohio, and Florida May as the person who will always know his address. In 1942, an advanced tax bill for Meta Wideman and Lanier Johnson. There are many property documents that link Meta Wideman and Lanier Johnson. The relationship between the two remains a puzzle. 1943, February 24, Dorothy Adele passes away. This article in the Akron Beacon Journal prints a few of the usual details. Lanier is devastated. He loses the most important link to his former life. 1945, December 28th. Lanier was in the hospital for 25 days and seemed to have had an operation. Lanier paid $116.85 in cash, with the total including all services except doctor fees being $174.14. By 1945, Lanier was working for Goodyear Aircraft Corporation, a job he held until he retired 15 years later. Notice he made just under $1,800 for tax year 1945. May 1945. Lanier made the papers again, this time in the society section. He was more a part of the community, and we actually see him in the photo, which is a birthday party for Florida May, who had turned 32. 1950 census. For the first time, Lanier is listed on the census, but without Dorothy. He is listed as a lodger, and his profession is the proprietor of a confectionery store. He reported 53 hours at work that week. 1960, January 2nd, the obituary of Lanier Johnson. He is buried at Glendale Cemetery in Akron, Ohio. And the name on his grave marker reads,
And the marker read Lanier Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Hurt, can you describe his final years as you remember them?
Well, he was living on Bisson here, the street that goes this way, in a house. My mother got him into a house where there were a couple nurses living there.
Nurse facility.
Yeah, like a nurse's facility, and they took care of him. And my mother would go down there every day because we just lived around the corner. And one day, one of the ladies called and said to my mother, "Mrs. Hurd, do you know your father's in the street? Because normally they watch him. They'll walk him, but they won't let him out of the house." And she said, "No." She said, "Well, he's in the street and he's walking naked." Okay, I'll come down. Well, by that time, he had, what do you call it?
We would call it senility back in those days, but could have been Alzheimer's, who knows?
He just went into deep depression.
Mm-hmm.
He was already depressed after he had to live in secrecy, that he could not have the normal life. And they were always guarded because they never know when they had to leave, because there were times they left in the middle of the night when she had those dreams. I mean, so they were on the run. So I really feel that played a big part in, and then the death of his of my grandmother, great grandmother, that really
That kind of
took him over
sealed
deep
it,
in.
yeah.
Yeah.
And whenever my great grandma, Adele, would have dreams, she would tell Oscar Mack, "It's time to move again. They're on our tail, so we have to move. We've got to move. We have to leave where we are now."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She would actually have dreams about the Klan or about people, yeah.
Right.
And I'm sure that was God's way of communicating to her, because she was open, her spirit was open to receive. And it was God's way of communicating to her that danger was approaching.
But how many times would you guess they had to move because of fleeing for their lives?
Oh, I'd say sometimes every 6 months. And sometimes, like in New Jersey, they stayed there the longest. But they were in Youngstown, they were in Connecticut, they were all over. But also, they were also with the people that they worked for. Because he was a chauffeur and she was a cook. My grandmother was a good cook. She could make something out of nothing. She was good.
My great-grandmother Adele ended up dying in 1944 as a result of hypertension. So, unfortunately, she never really lived a happy life, again, being bound by fear. She was a very creative woman, a very good cook. She was a backup singer for Betsy Smith for a while back in the 1920s, during the era of blues, if you will. but she ended up dying at the age of 44 in the early 1940s.
Meta Weidman of Daytona Beach, Florida, writes Lanier Johnson often. Her letters tell us what Lanier Johnson and family have been up to, but her exact relationship is still a mystery. In every letter, she thanks Lanier Johnson for the $5. Is it actually $5? Or is it code for something else? Meta wrote to Lanier soon after the death of his beloved wife Dorothy in February of 1943.
Dear Brother Johnson, I received your kind letter, and I was indeed more than grateful to hear from you, and to hear that you are well and able to work and getting along fine. I thank you for the $5. It will help me a lot. I'm always glad and thankful for whatever you sent me. I hope that you will stay there with Florida May. I am glad that you are there with them, because Sister Johnson wrote me that she did not want you to stay in New Jersey alone. I believe she's gone to rest because she was a very sick woman for a long time. The Lord knows best. B is so sorry. He sends much love and says you have his heartfelt sympathy. Don't worry any more than you can help. I know that you will miss her because I miss her. And we can only trust God. You have my heartfelt sympathy. I am your sister in Christ, Meta Weidman.
My grandmother, Florida Hurt, Oscar Mack's daughter, started work. She was a domestic all the way up until 1941. When the war broke out, Akron was very known for the the rubber factories in Ohio, in Akron. She went to work, one of the first black women to go to work for B.F. Goodrich. She said the first day that she went in, all of her white counterparts sat down and folded their arms. They refused to work with her. But her manager got up, her supervisor got up and said, hey, we cannot have this kind of behavior here because this is federal work. You're going to have to work with her. But she stayed in spite of all of the adversarial situations that were going on around her, and eventually became the first black woman secretary for the Teamsters Union. So that says a lot.
Your destination is on the right. You know, I They remember a lot of stuff that I kind of forgot.
Yes,
but I'll do the best I can. Okay.
We'll work together to make it happen. Yes.
It's sort of ironic. I mean, today we're having a memorial service. We were there.
Hey, it's been a while. You too, sir. Hey, Crystal.
This gentleman right here is Mr. Curtis Mickelson. Mr. Mickelson, this is my Captain Listen Hurt.
You heard of me? I've heard of you.
Let us pray. Father, we celebrate your goodness and your greatness. We thank you that nothing is hidden from you, God.
Praise the Lord.
Hallelujah. We are excited to celebrate this momentous moment in history, like Mr. Mack would be afforded the opportunity to have the name that their mom and dad gave them come forth and their story shared in their journey so that it can empower and strengthen others who are unsure of where they're going, who feel like the systems are against them, things are in place to hinder them. And so I'm excited about what we're doing today.
This poem was written by Vanessa Bonner and it's entitled The Bridge of Freedom to Love. I fought to live, but riddled in fear. Shadows of my past haunted me within. Forced to flee by fight that night, I sought for help by a spirit of light. She showed me the way from a bright star above, for which bought me a place of safety and love. I dare not be afraid, for I'm a soldier, you see, because I fought in a war of ones most bigger than me.
Been one of the greatest things about this story, that despite everything, despite the very real stories of like desolation and destruction that really define Central Florida in this period, this is a story of someone who dared to live, because it really does mean something to so many people. For my class, was very transformative. It got a lot of attention, in part because they were thinking about something that still matters today. This question of anti-Black violence, this question of displacement, and the question of remembering, as Curtis tossed out, reconciliation. The first part of that, though, is the truth part. And we struggle with telling the truth about it.
What do you do when the laws and the systems in place exclude who you are? What do you do when you are made a fugitive and you're hunted by humans as a human? When the laws discriminate and justice is prejudice, what do you do? Mr. Oscar Mack was a law-abiding man. He was a good man. He was a godly man. His name Oscar means Spear of God. It means divine strength. Mr. Oscar Mack had proven his patriotism by serving in the World War I. So what else did he have to prove to America? That he cared, that he belonged, that he counted.
And sadly, this is our history, and it's ours to own. And I speak as a white man right now. I think about those three white gentlemen, two who died, Ivy, Reinhold, Alderman, C.C. Collins, who maybe tried to be an ally. All of us have a piece of this story, and I feel it's incumbent on me to be my honor, own my part of this story. My people have to own this part of the story. So this is my work.
And just taking the time to tell his story, even tell his story incomplete because he got away, which to me will always be like when I tell this story, he got away and it's gonna be like the punchline of the story. He got married, he had a family, and he lived a life. And like that's gonna be a great part of the story. But telling the story, even telling the part of his struggle, telling about this transformation they were forced to make, it will be transformative for people today.
He got away for freedom. Mm-hmm. And to know that his message now is reconciliation. We got to move on. We have to move on. But I really feel that, as the title of the poem was, The Bridge of Freedom to Love. To love.
Yes.
Which a lot of us don't get to the love. We get stuck in the anger.
We got to get to the love.
Yeah, that's right. All of us.
All of us together.
Together.
So take this day as a lesson to be, not to boast in prideful accolades against one another, you see. Remember the bridge of freedom to love, because fear has no place in the kingdom of love.
I do believe that now we have a voice. Now we have Oscar Mack, and not only for him, but for all of the other people who have died, who were murdered. They have to have a voice now. And he's got a voice now that said, you know what? You were a champ. You were able to beat the odds, and you were determined because you did nothing wrong. You were trying to make a living for your family, but because of the epidemic of hatred at the time, They did not deem it necessary for you to have a good job that belonged to a white man.
I believe his life story is going to serve a purpose. And that's what it is, to bring people together.
After a gun battle in which he killed 2 of his attackers, Oscar Mack fled on foot to the north. For much of the rest of his life, Mack lived under an assumed name, on the run from white terrorists. Mack's great-grandson vowed to turn a family tragedy into a story of redemption and reconciliation. And in James Brown's own words, "This means a lot to me, not only for him, but for all of the other people who are lying in their graves, who were never heard, who were treated not even as second-class citizens in this country, not only for black people, but for Hispanics, for women, for any other minority group, if you will." We had talked about the fact that our government is saying, quote, "Make America great again." I cannot see where she was ever great. The bare fact is that in this country, over 50 million Native Americans were murdered, and black people were enslaved, and other ethnic groups were disenfranchised. So it was never great, but I do believe now, because of the stories that are surfacing, we can use these as a tool to bring people out of their ignorance.
I am mindful of the fact that we will probably never know the entire number of people who were lynched in the United States, ever.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's weird at some level that this is not a story about that. But in some ways, because it's not a story about that, it kind of reminds me often about that fact. Like, this is a guy who survived, and what does it take to survive? And what does it take to like deal with the trauma of being Black in America? And to sort of like know his story, and sort of know what he had to go through.
It is really possible for academics, ordinary citizens, and families to work together in a project like this. And for 3 groups and 3 individuals, in this case, James and Julian and myself, to navigate those and I've seen it happen with other groups too, whether it's Brian Stevenson's project out of Montgomery or other places. When these 3 elements are there, when we have community and we have academia that are giving us some really solid information and are protecting that information in archives, and we have family members telling their stories, wow, this is unstoppable, but this name lives on. Oscar Mack's name lives on. Now is the time more than ever. The university needs allies out here on the outside, and it needs families that trust them too. So this is the kind of project that says we really are here for each other, and that we can help heal, a country.
It's kind of a reminder both of what it takes to survive, but also what it takes to but also the legacy of like the past generations and the ways that they found a way forward, right? And so, I'm part of a project that basically all Black people have been involved in for a good long time about being better and advocating for better. And I think being reminded of that project of a civil society that values people and protects them, and how much that is something that Black people have striven for. It's kind of wrapped up in Oscar Mack's story.
I understand it a lot more clearly than I did then, but I remember feeling this immediately deep shame about the whole thing. Like, what on earth was going on that somebody needed to shoot him? And he was saving his own life is how he came to shoot my great-grandfather. And the first time I met with his great-grandson, James Brown, the first thing I said to him was, "I'm so sorry that someone in my family put your great-grandfather in the position to have to kill to save his own life." And I carry deep regret with that. And deep, deep shame. But I have to say, Mr. Brown made it better. He's such a healing presence and such a loving man. And I feel like I have a new cousin.
I want to use this project to serve, humanity. And I do believe that if one has been taught to hate, one can be taught to love. And I know that may sound a little bit idealistic, but I think there are two elements in the earth today or in the world, and that's fear. And then there's love. And I believe that the color of racism simply happens to be fear. And understanding that we are greater than our skin color, so much greater. So that's what I want to leave with the people, that we must learn as a human race. Because if we don't, we're going to go back and repeat it over and over and over again. And how many times have we, throughout history, Adolf Hitler, all of these different people who were so filled with hatred that they murdered millions of people, the indigenous people in this country. I understand that Hitler and some of the other dictators learned from this country about reservations, concentration camps, the whole 9 yards. We have to change, and I hope that this will be a tool to help change a mindset.
I hope somebody somewhere will have heard me say to James Brown, I'm so sorry someone in my family put your great-grandfather in that position to have to kill to save his own life. I'm so sorry. I hope somebody hears that and believes me.
They will, and they understand your sincerity in sharing that. That's the key.
That's my motivation.
That's the strength.
If enough people will do that, do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was here in 1960 as a little boy, but I cry not for him per se, but I rejoice today in truth. And I think in telling the story, it's not about hatred or revenge. It's about reconciliation.
Amen.
I would like to say that may the memory of Oscar Mack be a blessing to generations to come.
Hallelujah. Amen. Amen.